Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined this time by my in-person co-host Tucker Hazel. And we're here today to finally do it. We're here to finally make the definitive list of video games. But how are we going to do it? Why are we going to do it? I'll let you know in a second. What I will tell you off the jump is we want you involved. And to be involved, you should join our Discord. Link, as usual, is in the top of the description right down there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. That's all I need you to do.
Yeah, no other things. No specifiers this time.
No.
That's just 1, 2, 3, simple, easy, get in, get out, quick as you can. Quick as you like.
We're trying to get down to business because this is the first video in a larger in-person series we're doing in which we're... A trilogy. In which we are curating, again, as I said, with your help, the list of the 100 most essential video games. And that's a very important term that we'll get into. But I just want to lay out the framework before we get into the discussion. This video is going to involve us talking about lists of this ilk, what we like about them, what we don't like about them, and most importantly, how we are going to form our own list, the criteria involved. And then what we're going to do is make a second video in which both of I...
Second part of the trilogy.
Second part of the trilogy. I said both of I. What I meant was both of us will make our own lists. We'll share our lists. We'll share sort of the criteria that we're going to talk in this video, how those impacted the games we chose. And concurrent to that, you're going to be making your own list. Because the third video is going to synthesize your lists, our lists. They're going to come together, and they're going to form one megazord of a list that we're going to discuss in great detail. At the end of the video... Topical. At the end of the video, I'm going to talk...
Megazord from? Is that Power Rangers?
Megazord, I think, is Power Rangers.
Okay, sure, yeah. It shows that we have no fucking clue what we're talking about. At
the end of the video, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about how you're going to build your list. So stick around for that, but that's small potatoes, because right now we need to philosophize. So Tucker, why don't you just kick us off with the inception for this concept in the first place?
Well, yeah, the inception, as you mentioned, kind of came around with when GQ put out their list. And frankly, a lot of places, a lot of internet groups, publications, if you will, I'll let you, put out top 100 games of all time lists. Usually that's through the lens of something like best of all time, most important of all time, something like that. And there's a lot of conversation is spurred on by these. What games do they include? Why do they include them? Who are the people involved? And part of the reason some of those lists become a little bit frustrating is because the process is not clear. And it's that process that we want to... I got hold your horses. I got a golden dollar word right here. Elucidate. We're going to elucidate you guys with the process of what it is that we're doing in this list. As you said, we're talking about the criteria. It's that part that they don't talk about that we're most fascinated by here. And we're also leaning into the fact that we're not angling this as definitive. We're not angling this as best, replacing other people's lists, whatever. This is fully admitted through our eyes, based in this moment in time, based on our community, leaning into our biases, not trying to avoid that, not trying to come up with some sort of form of objectivity to like shape our list around. It's going to be free-flowing and hopefully feel very genuine and natural to us. We don't have to feel forced to include something because we think other people would, and we don't want you, if you're submitting, to do that as well. And we have a list of criteria that we want you guys to, and ourselves, to think about when making this list. And we want it as much as possible to stay within these bounds so there aren't just extra weird elements that can kind of, I don't know, add a little unnecessary tension.
There will be a Google document. A view-only Google document. No, but there will be. That's why I said the will part. Because we'll have to remember, between the two of us. We have
when I edit the video. Actually, I probably won't get this far in.
I mean, we have you got a notes app. We'll fucking throw it in Google Docs.
Do it right here. Make a Google Doc.
Look at that.
With this shit. All right.
The important note here is that this transparency of process. Because when we mathematically assemble your list, our list, we want to make sure we're all sort of starting from the same point and have the same things in mind. Because one of my major issues with like the GQ list, for instance, is everybody was only supposed to submit 10 games. It's more of like a AFI Sight and Sound sort of situation. But we're gonna do it a little bit differently. As I said, we'll get into the specifics of your submission at the end of the video. But beyond that, their list and a lot of people's lists don't particularize what should be going into decision making.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's almost always my issue with the lists. My problem when I view these top 100 lists is that I say, here's 100 games that you're saying are the best.
Usually.
Because the best is usually the most clickable way to phrase this idea.
We're not going for clicks here.
No.
I don't think this video is probably not getting any fucking views.
No. But the issue with that for me is I think, okay, well, what best means to me is not what best means to Tucker.
Yeah.
And it's not what best meant to all the different people submitting to these various aggregate lists.
Yeah.
So I want to make it very clear, not only to each other, but to the audience, why we are choosing this criteria, how they interact with each other, and how they get to this idea of essential.
Yeah.
So I think before we even get into the specific criteria, why essential? What does the word essential mean to you? And why are we choosing essential instead of best or top?
Well, I think essential avoids the definitiveness. Yeah. Or I would say in my eyes kind of the superiority that comes with best. Like this sits at the top. You can't fucking fight against this. Essential invites a little bit of interpretation, and I think that's what we're trying to go for. Is like we know this is not that best. This is essential, and I also think that we chose that word because it best encapsulates the list of criteria that we're going for. I think we kind of actually we worked from essential, and then we came up with the ideas. But if you worked a little backwards in some sort of alternate universe, God forbid, I know we're getting a little multiverse fatigue here, but you went from the list of criteria that we have. I don't think you would pick out best from that. Yeah. It's a synthesis of different elements of games, as we'll get to, from their quality to their importance to what they mean to you personally, because we're leaning into our biases. And essential kind of puts a nice bow on top of all that.
I agree. I mean, the other word, because you talk about the superiority, but I also think the word objectivity is important.
Sure, yes.
Because I look at a lot of lists. The Empire list was very interesting to me for a number of reasons. As we talked about in our Discord, again, join the Discord. If you're watching this, you probably are in the Discord.
Yeah, sure.
I have an issue with the ascription of positions on these best lists to games that I feel like you can pretty blatantly look at and say that they are not the best games of all time.
I would absolutely agree.
And in my opinion, if you want to make a list of the top of the best 100 games of all time, go on Metacritic. Yeah. Sort by score.
That's the closest you're going to get to objectivity.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's...
it's going to include some scuffed shit and some weird stuff from a long time ago that only got 10 reviews, but they're all 10 out of 10 is going to be up there. And so there's going to be problems, but that's the closest you're going to get to objectivity. And there's still problems with that.
And the overarching issue is that trying to look at art like this through the lens of objectivity is really nonsensical.
Exactly.
I don't think it works. And so what we're trying to do is actually drop the phone with the criteria on it as number one. That's
so
the first
we
thing we're
can't
do.
read them, and now they're here.
And we succeeded to that effect, actually. But the other thing we're trying to do, as you said, is lean into the personal experience.
Yes.
Because my feeling, and I've expressed this many times to you and to the Discord, join the Discord, you're already in the Discord, you're fine. Bro, you're all good.
Yeah.
Is that the best way to find objectivity is to find patterns in subjective behavior.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's why everybody's going to make a list, and then they're going to be mathematically put together. So everybody's subjective list ends up sort of becoming parts that define trends.
Exactly.
Because then when a game like Breath of the Wild is essential to 4 or 5 different people, that's a great sign. That means that game is truly essential to a lot of people and thus belongs on lists like this. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of my philosophy on this whole situation and why I think it's probably time to get into the particulars here.
Yeah. Let's start with...
the first one. You're going to confuse me otherwise.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's simple brain. You got to go 1, 2, 3. The first one we have on here is, frankly, not the one I would have started with, but I got to do it for someone here, is... we want these games to be of the highest quality, and I think mostly that's just as a bar. Don't choose something that you know is broken in some way. There might be games you have a ton of goddamn fun with, but are technically flawed, don't work like they should. They can absolutely have essential experiences, but when factoring in should a game be on this list, you're going to want to aim for something that is technically sound and works as intended.
Because I think, and I didn't really answer my own question that I posed before of what essential means to me. When I look at essential, I look at these are the 100 games that if you played, you're going to get a really great survey of what the artistic medium of games can accomplish.
Well, that's the second point. That's the second part.
And we'll get into it. But I sort of view the list as a whole.
Don't confuse yourself.
And the word essential as a I kicked the table. It's okay. Calm.
There wasn't an earthquake. We don't have those in Nebraska. Essential.
Essential is a great word to describe the starting point.
Yeah.
Because I think about when you consider the canon of any medium, right? Of film, of books, of games, and the canon is limited. There's maybe an impulse to say that this is all you got to play, and you get it, right? To me, these are the essential games. If you want if we are trying to build a skeleton of what somebody should play and know and understand, this is probably it. But that doesn't mean it's the beginning of the end. Yeah. It doesn't even mean that's necessarily the very best. But as you're saying, there is a bar of quality that is intrinsic to being sort of significant enough as a game, as an artistic expression, to merit being one of the essential games of all time. Yeah.
And what's interesting about this is I feel like this is kind of the most obvious rule, which is maybe a good thing to start with it as the first one. I wouldn't choose any games that weren't high quality in terms of their technical reliability or I don't know, any facet you can throw at a game that's like, okay, well, that could have been patched. That could have been done with a little bit of bug testing. I don't think I would pick any games like that, but I just throw it out there. It's like, yeah, it's obvious, but also maybe try to rein it in a little bit. If a game that you love has tons of technical issues, maybe that's not one to include.
It's also important to note that when you think of highest quality, you can also think of quality as relative to the era of release. Yeah, this is the other point that I think was great to raise about highest quality, because you might look at you might look at a 9th generation game on PlayStation 5 and say this is of a higher quality than a game in terms of quality as fidelity opposed to a game that came out in a 5th or 6th generation. But ultimately, you got to think sometimes of quality as relative to the time period. And as you're going to see as we get down this list, you also have to think about quality relative to all these other metrics.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's actually something we maybe should have said before laying out our criteria, but regardless, we're doing it now. It's close enough. Is a game for either of us or for any of you doesn't need to hit all of these to show up on a list. You just want to bring all of these into conversation. And if it hits enough of them, it's like, okay, obviously this fits enough. It can go on the list. And so if you choose a game that hits everything but has some technical issues, that's fine. I mean, it does the other one. So failing one is not the end all be all.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. As you'll see, there's actually some of these criteria that maybe are in a direct opposition with each other. Yeah. But that's important to me because, again, it complicates the idea of essential, and it complicates the choices you're making, and it forces you to consider your games holistically.
Yeah, the pros and cons of each one. Because every game has pros and cons.
Right. This is not us saying Ocarina of Time is the number one most essential game of all time because it's flawless and perfect and it defines these things about the industry and blah, 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 blah. No, Ocarina of Time is a very flawed game. Yeah. But Ocarina of Time is also amazing for a number of reasons. So we just want to get you all in that headspace.
Yeah. And so let's go on to the second one, which you kind of already mentioned, but to state it just flat out. Yeah. Criteria number 2 is that the games on this list should show what the medium is capable of through breadth and diversity. You can have a bunch of great shooters on your list. Yeah. But maybe you should have something else than just shooters. Right. It is possible to name 50, 100 first-person shooter, third-person shooter games that are all fantastic and would deserve slots on a list. Maybe not that big. It might be a little difficult to do that. But you could have a lot of them. But representing the medium in terms of artistic and technical possibility and breadth and diversity in genre and era and things of that nature, not having everything fit into a certain bucket is essential to the medium of video games. Yeah. If you're trying to give someone, as we've been saying, a skeleton of what the industry is like, you're going to want to represent multiple bones. You're not going to want one giant strong bone in the middle, one boner. You're going to want a bunch of bones. You're going to want a fibula.
A fibula.
Shin. No, it's the same one.
Scapula.
Pelvis. Yeah, you want a bunch of bones.
Yeah. It's important to know that you do have a strong boner right now. But you just can't see because of where the camera's positioned. Yeah. As we go, Tucker, I'm actually going to speak about a game in particular. Okay. Just because I think it kind of illustrates the hoops to jump through as you work on your own list. A game I'm thinking about right now, but whether or not I want to include it, because I'm on the fence, is Wii Sports. Okay. Oh, interesting. And I think Wii Sports is interesting. I'll sort of apply these criteria to Wii Sports as we get on the list. Yeah. And it'll sort of illustrate the thought process here. Because when you think about breadth and diversity and possibility, these keywords you're shouting out, Wii Sports definitely fits those criteria.
Absolutely.
But you could also make an argument that maybe it's not of the highest quality.
Sure.
Because in some ways it's quite shallow. Now it's also quite replayable. So maybe the replayability counts overweighs that shallowness. So it's something to think about. What I'm beginning to do is apply these different criteria to my game. Yeah. And then I start to wonder, well, maybe it's not the highest quality on a mechanical level. Yeah. You can just waggle that Wii remote loose on the wrist strap and you can play tennis. It's
true.
But it's also, in other ways, very polished. Yeah. But it is nonetheless, even if you want to debate the quality, it is no doubt illustrative of what games can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Yeah, and I think that also is something that I'm going to be keeping in mind. Obviously, I'll be keeping all of this in mind. Yeah. But specifically, the diversity of what video games can do is something that really tickles my funny bone. Yeah. I like when a game tries something new. Even if it fails at doing that, if it introduces a new concept that's then spun off into other things, the medium of video games can be a ton of different things. And sometimes things take inspiration from other places, but showing the diversity of video games is something that I'm constantly thinking about. I'm like, I can't believe that a game can be a 1-minute interactive screensaver, basically, and that is a microcosm of what tiny, small level game design can be, or it can be something that you can spend thousands and thousands and thousands of your life in, hours of your life in. And that breadth, I think, is very fascinating. I want that to be represented on our list.
Tucker, there's a very important criteria.
Hopefully all of them.
Very important criteria, yes. But I think it's important that we jump to the one that's bottom on our list. I said I want to go in order.
But don't get too confused. Oh, God.
But now I saw the second from the bottom. Bottom now. It's important that to make this note here. Yeah. Because as you were saying, you're talking about these games you can play for thousands of hours. Yeah. You might bring up like a World of Warcraft, for instance. I have not played World of Warcraft. No. You have not played World of Warcraft. And this is going to be the most important criteria I think that everybody sticks to.
Actually, should have mentioned this earlier. Yeah. Yeah.
But you can only include games on your list that you have played.
Yes. Yes.
Now, you can make the judgment call that means you finished the game. Yeah. That means that you played it for an hour and you understood its promise and you understand why it's important. Yeah. But you can't include a game simply because you believe it's essential. Yes. The example being World of Warcraft, as I just said. Yeah. There's no doubt that that is the essential archetypal example of the MMO. Now, maybe people in our audience are going to put Final Fantasy 14 on there, and that's a great choice. Yeah. But it's important.
New World? Did that one get shut down?
I think so.
Okay, it's an Amazon game.
I wouldn't be surprised. But I just think that's so important, and it goes back to my point before of essential being defined by the trends. Yeah, yeah. Because I do think that at a certain point, in a game like World of Warcraft, if a lot of us haven't played it, being really core gamers, maybe that speaks to it not being as essential as we think. And that's a conclusion we can draw and litigate in the third video, because with any experiment, because there's a component of scientific experiment here. Sure. There's a component to where if we had
I'm looking to get this published.
If we had tens of thousands of people submitting, World of Warcraft would be there. Probably. But I think it says something about the fact that, at least for us, it physically cannot be. Yeah. So.
And that's also part of the leaning into bias and being okay with that we're leaning into bias. Because this is something that I've done experiments like this before with our friend Daniel on our Discord server. He and I have worked over a couple of different Discord sessions to make a list that's very different from the intent of this list. We tried our best to compile a list of top 100 best games of all time that felt like it was a synthesis of all the other lists that we'd seen. And what are people going to expect on this list? What are other people going to put on this list? And frankly, when it comes to a list like that, there's dozens and dozens of games that I have not played. Yeah. Not that I'm not interested in them, not that I might not enjoy them, but I haven't experienced them yet. And so when I think about balancing this in my own mind, letting myself free of what other people would put on a list, especially because I hadn't played them, is like Goku taking off his fucking weighted boots and
wasn't that E. coli? What's his name? Rock Lee.
What?
Rock Lee took off the ankle weights.
Well, I'm thinking about Goku. Same guy basically. Because I want this to represent myself, and let's put an example in there. A game like Halo 3, a game that you expect to see on one of these lists. It's going to show up on a lot of the people in our servers lists. But I've never played that game. And so it would be dishonest of me to put it on there. And there's plenty of games that fit that same criteria as well. World of Warcraft, I think, is one because you and I are not particularly interested in that game. Where it would
cringe.
That as well. But we want this to be honest. We want it to be genuine. And it would not be genuine for me to be like, okay, yeah, people expect Halo 3 on this list. And I know other people would.
Yeah.
But I've never touched that game. I can't speak from a personal level to its quality. And so we want to be able to personally attest to the quality and impact of these games. And so you have to have played it. That's very important.
And it also it removes the guesswork.
Yeah,
when you're
definitely.
reading a list of, well, why is this here?
Yeah.
Well, the reason that any game on this list is here is because the people who put them there are passionate about them.
Yeah, definitely.
And passion is so important to conversations like this.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I feel dispassionate about it sometimes is because I have no ability in my mind to jump through the gymnastics that you and Daniel did.
Sure.
To say, you know what, this is what a lot of people think.
Yeah.
Brother, I barely know what I think about anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's just a more, as you're saying, honest
Yeah.
approach to the conversation.
Yeah. Now, let's jump to another one. This is actually, I think, the one that usually fucks with me the most.
Yeah.
And it's something that I will be wrestling with probably the most of any of these on my list.
Yeah.
Is the historical importance of these games. Because for a game to be essential, having impact and being important on a historical scale is totally important.
Yeah.
Most of the games that are considered some of the greatest of all time have that. You can levy at them immediately. Like, of course, that's historically important. Look how it influenced all the other games, influenced its own series, sold a ton of copies, all of that. But it's something that I have a hard time wrestling with myself, which is why I think it's good to add it to our list of criteria in the conversation. Is, again, a game does not need to hit all of these.
Yeah.
Should it hit being historically important? Yeah, probably. But
you should consider it.
Exactly. Considering it in that conversation. Is its historical importance enough to where it's okay, it doesn't hit one of the other ones?
Yeah.
Are the other ones enough to where it's okay, it's not actually historically important? But I think it's also one of the most important aspects of this list, of this conversation, because games being historically important, I'd say 90-95% of the time means that they hit these other metrics.
Yeah, I'm actually just going to directly draw our next criteria into conversation because I think it's important for this.
Yes, and these are the two that, as you was mentioning earlier, kind of might feel at odds with one another, but you need to weigh them in your mind.
Yeah, the next one is, can this game still be considered an excellent game today?
Yeah.
And this is where the historical importance kind of is in check.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to move away from the Wii Sports example for a second.
Sure.
Because
you actually never brought that up again. So you already failed your own thing.
I have played Wii Sports. How about that?
Yes. We have played Wii Sports.
Let's continue this again. Let's think about... No, I'll keep using Wii Sports.
Christ.
You got to apply this. You have to apply these criteria to all your games, right? So... There's no doubt that Wii Sports is incredibly historically important.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that by any stretch of the imagination. But this next point, can still be considered an excellent game today, kind of goes back to the point about highest quality. But what it also does is it draws into conversation other entries in its series.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is what's really key. Because when I think about this, now I have to say, okay, this is doubtlessly the most important Nintendo sports of the Nintendo console sports games.
Nintendo blank sports.
Yes, Nintendo blank sports games.
Nintendo blank sports, possibly blank.
No, but it's not called Nintendo Wii Sports. It's called Wii Sports.
Shit, fuck. Okay, console sports, possibly blank, if there's an addendum.
Yes, that's the best way to put it. But so you would think to myself, okay, Wii Sports is the most historically important. Let's just be precise. Of Wii Sports Resort, Nintendo Switch Sports.
Yeah, Wii Sports Club.
And Wii Sports Club. I apologize. I haven't even played Wii Sports Club.
I don't even know how to. We can't even access that game.
It's too expensive to get a physical copy, so I'm not gonna play it, unfortunately. Sorry, Wii Sports Club fans.
Of those four games,
is no doubt the most historically important. Now you could make the argument that, well, maybe I should include Wii Sports Club, but I can't because I haven't played it. Okay, so that's stricken from the record.
Yeah.
Now I have to wonder Wii Sports Resort or Nintendo Switch Sports. Well, Nintendo Switch Sports has basically no historical importance.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's not even maybe that excellent.
Yeah.
But you can look at Wii Sports Resort and say, okay, Wii Sports Resort, in my opinion at least, is still an excellent multiplayer game.
Yeah.
It rectifies a lot of the issues with Wii Sports, the first Wii Sports, by having far more gameplay options, far more sports on the whole.
Yeah. I couldn't include that because I never played it.
Much more precise control because of Wii Motion Plus.
Yeah.
So then I have to think to myself, okay, is that quality, that relative quality, higher than Wii Sports? And frankly, I think that maybe it is.
Yeah.
Because now I wonder to myself, okay, Wii Sports Resort, I still think as a Blue Ocean piece of software, hits the highest quality bar.
Yeah.
And it still shows that the medium is capable of the way that Wii Sports does, but it just does it in a better way. And it still is so close to Wii Sports in time period.
True.
And even in terms of sales impact, because it wasn't a bundled game for a lot of the time, and it still sold 33 million units. So maybe now I'm thinking about Wii Sports Resort instead of Wii Sports.
Yeah.
These are the sort of adjustments you have to be making when you're considering this list.
Yeah, and even when we're having this conversation, comparing primarily those two games and seeing where they fall on our criteria, it's also important to note that if you're going through these criteria, if you also want to include Wii Sports / Wii Sports Resort, one of them, and you come down on that Wii Sports historical importance outweighs the quality difference that Wii Sports Resorts has, then sure, you can disagree. Put Wii Sports, and that's what the conversation is, what the balance is about. It's okay as long as you think about these things. Wherever the balance ends up, that's totally fine. That's valid.
Yeah, it's up to you to make these decisions for yourself, and it's also I'm just gonna skip ahead another one.
Okay.
Don't worry about serious overrepresentation.
Yes.
If you feel like Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort belong on that
True.
list,
Yeah, absolutely.
you put Wii Sports, you put Wii Sports Resort on that list.
Absolutely.
That's within your power to do.
Yeah, and that's actually we talked about historical importance being the one that I think shapes the most of these lists that we're trying to form our own version of.
Yeah.
But I think overrepresentation might be one of the most talked about elements.
Yeah.
Because you think about one of these hypothetical, but many exist, top 100 games of all time lists. And people often are like, how many Zelda games should I include?
Yeah.
Do all the 3D Mario go on there? Do I only choose a few because I want to leave room for other things? Which I think the inclusion of a lot of games obviously naturally goes against having diversity on your list. Yeah. But again, it's a balance game.
Exactly.
If you have played and love every Zelda game, and they are historically important, they're very high quality games, but that goes a little bit against having variety, that's fine. Yeah. As long as you compare all of these elements and you're like, okay, no, it's still worth having all these games. These games are essential, even if there's a bunch of them and it comes at the cost of having other things.
Yeah.
It's okay. And I wonder, looking at some of these lists, how much they think about overrepresentation. Because sometimes there's some on there that are missing that are like, oh, that's weird. I wonder why that's not on there. And of course, there's probably plenty of reasons why. But overrepresentation sometimes, I think, can cloud the thought process of being genuine and true. It's like, maybe most Zelda games are better than most games and are more essential than most games. So it's okay to have a bunch of Marios or Zeldas or Final Fantasies or whatever you love on there if you feel that they meet those criteria and you're willing to make the sacrifice of, okay, maybe that comes at the cost of more diversity.
That's exactly the thing, as you're saying. You have to. It's that push and pull.
Yeah.
And in a series like Zelda, as you're saying, you look at Zelda 1, you look at Ocarina of Time, you look at Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
At least those three, you can make a great case for why those hit literally every criteria we talked about. Yeah. How they do illustrate a breadth of the medium.
Yeah.
How they do push things forward. Sure. How they are of the highest quality. How they are still considered excellent. How they are all historically important.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to fill your list with one series if you think that's what belongs.
Yeah. Are there any? Well, so we've kind of won over most of these in like a nebulous order.
Yeah, there's one more we need to hit still.
Okay. Which is yes. Yeah. And this is an interesting one, and this is going to flow into our sort of larger conversation about these kind of lists. Though we've mostly been talking about this all the time, but don't fight against recency bias. Yeah. This is something that, okay, we're talking about I've mentioned this is really important to talk a lot with these lists. This is important to talk about a lot of these lists, but I think this is another one of those very core elements to one of these discussions is recency bias. How much does that factor into a game showing up on one of these lists? If a game won Game of the Year last year, high chance it's going to show up on one of these lists. Right. And people are going to be currently thinking about it, and maybe they're not thinking about something that was Game of the Year 30 years ago, whatever it is. But something that I discovered looking back at a lot of these lists to sort of draw them into conversation while making our own, is that almost every list from almost every era includes a lot of recency bias. And frankly, I think that's a good thing. And here's why. Trying to make something objective, as we were talking about, that's something we don't want to do.
Yeah.
Fights against the idea that you are a person in your moment and through your recent experiences having been shaped by your recent experiences. Objectivity, you try to push all that out the window, but I think it's less honest to do that. Yeah. And seeing some game that, frankly, I don't even remember what it's called, on EGM's top 100 games of all time list coming out in 2001 or 1997. I looked at some old lists here. Having those show up there is interesting to me. Yeah. It's unique. It brings something to the table of this pantheon of discussions rather than it just being the obvious ones that you see over and over again. Those are the games that make your list distinct. And again, we want to lean into bias here. We want to be okay with that. Yeah. Because hiding that, I think, again, fights against it from being honest.
I agree. And this is actually something that I struggle with a lot.
Sure.
Because I get nervous about making big declarative statements.
Sure.
Like I very infamous, I mean, it's not infamous because nobody thinks about
infamous to you, maybe to
infamous me. Infamous to you. The statement that I felt that The Last of Us Part 2 is my favorite game of all time.
Yeah.
Now, I don't feel that way anymore.
Yeah.
Not because I flipped on the game. I still think that it is, and you'll see it on this list, but I still think
Spoilers.
It is one of the most seminal games that's ever been created for so many reasons, and one of the high watermarks for artistic achievement in the medium. But if I were to make my list now, I'd probably put that game in my top 10.
Yeah.
But to me, there's a huge difference between 10 and 1. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But what you do that I really like and want to try to incorporate more of into my own thinking.
Everyone can always learn from me.
Yes.
Especially you.
You can learn often what not to do from you. But once in a while you learn something like that.
A secret nugget. Panning for gold on what's called pan mining, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Sometimes you find one in there. It's mostly shit though.
Prospecting, I believe it's called.
Never done that myself.
Your lists are so fluid.
Yeah.
You are constantly changing your top games of all time.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly throwing things up at the very tops of lists when you've barely beaten them.
Yeah.
You've got Final Fantasy 16 as your fourth favorite game of the year so far.
Yeah.
And you're like halfway through.
Yeah, I hit 50% today.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool, and it's something that I want to think more about, because you're right. There's no reason why I should preclude a game like Kirby and the Forgotten Land as being the high watermark for what a more linear 3D platformer can be.
Yeah.
When I think it is probably the best.
Yeah.
But because it came out last year, part of my brain is like, it's not old enough to know yet.
Yeah.
But that is why we're going to be making a new version of this list every 4 weeks.
Jesus Christ! That'd be a lot of work. Holy shit.
I think... But
every once in a while.
Yeah.
We want this to be something that we come back on and then we're able to reflect, not only because, hopefully our community will be bigger between the times of us making versions of this list, but also seeing which ones stick and which ones don't stick. And having a baseline there that isn't, okay, this is the obvious ones, but reflects the current moment, allows you to see more change. Yeah. And the ones that stick are the ones that end up becoming those obvious ones. And that, I think, is part of the process that I find the most fascinating, is putting Nintendo, what was their thing called? Nintendo Power. Nintendo Power made a top 100 games of all time list. 1996, something like that. It was like, I think their 150th issue. And most of their top 5 was games that had released in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And guess what they were? Mario Kart 64, Super Mario 64, games that had just released on the Super Nintendo and the N64, Final Fantasy VI, Super Metroid. Guys, these games had just come out at that point. It was recency bias at that point. And that's a good thing, because then we were able to see Mario 64, Super Metroid, Final Fantasy VI not leaving those lists because they first showed up there at the moment, in the moment, because of recency bias. The fact that they didn't leave proves that they have that longevity. And that's why I think it's really good to lean into the recency bias. And I'm okay with putting God of War Ragnarok and Tears of the Kingdom in my top 10 games of all time immediately, because I also recognize it's okay if I change my mind over time.
Yeah.
And it's okay if this list, it's a good thing if this list changes over time. It's a good thing if classic games that were once at the top have dropped or dropped off the list, because that proves that the medium is evolving. The conversation is evolving. New ideas, new voices are being brought into it. The recency bias is the only way, I think, to chip away at that and continue in making forward progress. And so I won't be putting games that came out in the last 2 or 3 years won't be most of my list, because most of the games that I've played, but a bunch of them will be on there, and I think that's a very good thing for the health of this list. And frankly, to be most honest to myself, when I finished Tears of the Kingdom and put it in my top 10 games of all time, that was a true emotion. I actually felt I wasn't lying about that. And so, well, spoilers, that'll probably be on my list. I think it's one of the most essential games of all time. Irregardless of if I played it 3 weeks ago or 10 years ago, at the moment, that's how I feel.
Yeah. I have nothing else to add. I think it's really well put.
Yeah.
We did it.
Well, we also have community submissions, because we talked about this. We laid out the first few criteria that we had, and we wanted to, again, incorporate community, because that's what we love doing here at Backlog Banter. It's not just us. We got a lot of jackasses, all fuckheads, that give us their thoughts. And so a couple of people, not as many as usual, but a couple of people put their thoughts on this, gave us ideas of other criteria, gave their thoughts on top 100 lists as a whole, what's good, what's bad, what they think we should change. And so we're going to bring those into a conversation. You want to start with your best friend here?
My best friend, Brogan chatting.
Yeah! Brogan chatting.
Bro says, I think a top 100 game list would either capture, honestly, the breadth of the medium at its best, or most creative and influential, or more realistically capture the sentiments of those making it.
Yeah.
I don't like to take lists seriously unless there's intensely personal picks, or in the quote-unquote objective sense, there is none. The list tries to think about the function a specific choice represents in the list.
Yeah.
The recency bias is real, but in fairness to Tucker, simultaneously we should recognize leaps forward within a genre or style. What makes a list special is what's unique about it, and when you're unique, you're also proudly honest.
Yeah. And that, I think, kind of that last sentence, I think, encapsulates a lot of the elements we've been talking here about leaning into your bias and being honest about your thoughts. Exactly. What are your thoughts on being honest to yourself?
I think we should just read the next. Okay. I think we should just read the next submission.
The next submission comes from Daniel, who put in his own criteria, and we'll kind of go through each of these and say, obviously, some of them will reflect what we did, but maybe some of those didn't make it. We'll talk about why we didn't. Daniel's criteria is, number 1, games that push the medium forward. And he has in parentheses, actually, I think I probably had this, but I think I probably surmised this from something he was saying, through the departments of gameplay and visuals. I think it's very interesting. Do you want to go one by one, or do you want to read?
Just read them.
Okay. Number 2, games that have historical significance. You got what I said. I stumbled through it, but the general idea is there, which we have on our list. Number 3, games that are influential, which I think is interesting because I would kind of lump those two together. And number 4, games of the highest quality. Obviously, that's one of ours as well. And he says, my biggest gripe with lists is when there are too many games for one franchise. And obviously, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Daniel, we disagree, and we don't want that to be an aspect. But are there any of these that you find interesting that are, you want to reiterate what we said, or that might be slightly different?
Yeah, I think Daniel and us are largely on the same page. I'm interested in the idea of pushing the medium forward. Because as we're talking about, that is a component of what we're saying.
Actually, I would almost lump 3 of his things into one.
Yeah.
Games that push the medium forward usually are the ones that have historical significance because they made those jumps, other things copy them, and then that becomes a trend that continues forward and then peters off, after a while. And then because of that, they're also usually the ones that have the most influence. Yeah. So I think it's interesting that he split them into different aspects. I think they are different things, but they kind of all stick to one another.
I think, maybe the point of difference, because I think that what Daniel's saying about moving the medium forward is very important and something that I think a lot about. I think separating significance, though, sometimes can be interesting. Okay. I mean, we've talked in the past about sort of how a game's legacy is formed and how that's discussed.
No, that video's not up yet.
Well, that's okay. At some point in time, you'll see our thoughts. And you'll hear your own thoughts, because we have community for that, too. A lot of community submissions for that video, which is really fun. So you guys are being cringe right now, but you're going to make it up to us by submitting your list. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. I think you can imagine a game like Among Us
Sure.
Boom. As being what is the word he is? Influential.
Yeah, that was one of them.
Yeah, influential in a moment.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really push anything forward.
Sure.
So I think there can certainly be games that are influential but unessential. I think also for me, FIFA probably falls under that.
Sure.
Although you can also probably make a very salient argument for why you should have a sports game on your list.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't know.
And there are definitely games that push the medium forward in terms of being something totally fresh. Virtual Boy games. Other, niche consoles that try something totally new, but then people don't really like it, so it doesn't really stick around. That's pushing the medium forward, but it might not have historical significance because it didn't influence other games.
I'm gonna put Tellero Boxer on my list.
What the fuck is that?
That is my point. Who was next to submit?
One lovely Phil the Pill, who
Philip the Pillup has such an interest. Phil has never said something in Discord that wasn't interesting.
It's true.
And I think
you might have liked it, you might have not liked it. Second one happens quite often, but it's always interesting.
Yeah, and I have a lot to say about everything Phil says. So.
Philip the Pillup's really fucking funny.
I just
it popped in your head.
Yeah.
Phil says he actually kind of combined what Daniel did and what Bro did because he gave multiple points, but he put them in a little more detail than what Daniel did. Be better, Daniel. He says for the first one, longevity or potential longevity. If it's an old game, is it still relevant to a player, or, as best as we can tell, has a recent entry done enough to be considered a must-play by future players? This is a really interesting one. Because longevity was not a part of our criteria above. And I believe you and I actually kind of talked through this one off camera. Should we include this or not? I think that a lot of the subjectivity of what longevity means to you has it been a game that you played as a kid that you're still thinking about today? Okay, that's a form of longevity.
Yeah.
And I also like the idea of kind of future projecting longevity. Games that have come out recently that are wildly popular that are going to stick around for years. That's a form of longevity in an interesting way. But I think because those are so subjective / future projective, they aren't really useful to the in the moment conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing?
Sorry, I was just picking up a sticky wicket and I couldn't get off my hand.
Oh.
Because I think that this is a very sticky wicket that Phil has presented us with. Longevity is such an interesting point.
Yeah.
Because I'm interested in the interpretation of longevity, which is why I'm largely not super crazy about being a criteria for the list.
It's very open for interpretation.
Because a game like... I hate to even say the term Super Metroid.
Just fucking say it! God damn!
A Super Metroid has longevity in a design sense.
Yeah.
It has longevity in a lot of senses. Mm-hmm. But does it have longevity for me personally? No, because it's not the Metroid game I replay.
Yeah.
But is replayability longevity? Is the length of time you spend with the game longevity?
Yeah, definitely.
I have no way of knowing if Tears of the Kingdom is going to have any longevity. In fact, part of me has doubts about that.
Yeah.
Which is something I'm excited to discuss in a Tears of the Kingdom specific video. But I just think that longevity is a blanket concept that is more precisely tackled by the criteria we've suggested above.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that because it's so open for interpretation, in order to include this as some sort of criteria, I think we have to define it, number one, which is not possible and so open for interpretation. But number two, if we were to define it as, okay, a game sticking around, as the most generalized definition I can give at the moment without thinking about it too hard, what does sticking around mean? You have to then define that. So that maybe that wasn't a great definition because it needs a definition. But then what's the period of time? Where do we draw the line? Does it need to stick around for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Do games that come out, are games that have come out within the last 5 to 10 years not eligible for that because we don't know if they're actually have that kind of longevity? Does it need to be sticking around in top 100 lists to be considered a game with a long tail? Does it need to still have active players? It's a very confusing kind of hard thing to navigate.
And the other thing about it is, why does Super Metroid have longevity? It has longevity because it pushed the medium forward. It illustrated what you could do with games. It is also of a very high quality, and for a significant number of people in this video frame, it still holds up very, very, very well.
Is it statistically significant? I guess 50% is pretty
It's pretty significant.
Yeah, that's pretty
I was also going to leave it open to interpretation.
Oh, sure. Oops.
Well, there's a couple apparitions in the frame also that you just might not be able to see, and they have opinions of Super Metroid.
Like a ghost finger going down your back, a chill going down your spine.
But
I fucked up a couple words there.
I just think that we get this notion of longevity by interrogating its root pillars, and the root pillars we spelled out.
Yeah. Usually, our elements end up causing a game to have longevity. Yeah.
Next,
number 2. Integration of gameplay mechanics with artistic possibilities of the time. Factoring in technological limitations, does the game capture imagination by weaving its game design within elements such as story and production design? On the flip side, is the gameplay so unique and addictive that the gameplay stands alone without any relevant criticisms of its artistic production? And then he gives a specific example, but I think we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, I think my feelings about this are similar to my feelings on his point about longevity.
Yeah, that one. Check it in Webster's dictionary.
As Phil is saying here, because this is such a Rambuner sentence. Integration of gameplay mechanics with artistic possibilities of the time.
Yeah.
I really like this.
Too many words. A lot of words I don't know. Hard to understand. Don't want to listen. Plug my ears. Very Rambuner.
I think that, again, you reach this through more root considerations. Sure. Because this is definitely something I consider a lot. How does the game capture imagination? First of all, that's really important to me.
Yeah.
As I talked about in our Why We Love Games video. By weaving its game design within elements such as story and production design. You know, we're actually having a conversation earlier today about Final Fantasy 16 and the ways that it does or does not do that.
Yeah.
And thinking about affordances of medium are very important. But to me, you sort of get to that, as we're saying, by does this game illustrate the breadth of the medium?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's how a game conveys its narrative.
Yeah.
Like Tetris Effect, I have talked about on the channel before as being, for me, one of the most emotional game narratives ever, and that's told largely through doing.
Yeah. And
doing is not expository in any way. And it's very novel in its approach to evoking story. So I just think that hitting this bar, which is sort of more of a personal thesis for how I would approach my selections of games, I have to again go through the criteria we have.
Yeah, well, I think it's just kind of a different interpolation of some of the criteria we've already posited. Much like his longevity thing was, it is obviously tangential to what our criteria, but it's also such a fucking long sentence that as a criteria, it seems a little bit hard to nail down. But I do like this, and I think it is kind of sampled in our breadth of the medium, influence on other games, having historical significance. Lots of games that do very unique things, as we mentioned before, get those other elements. They usually line up, though. Again, not every game doesn't need to hit all of these to be considered worthy of inclusion on this list.
Yep.
Number 3. Now, this is an interesting one that we had a very big discussion about.
Yes.
We struggled with it was actually on our list at a certain point. But accessibility. He says, I don't mean this only in the sense of whether the game has been designed with all disabilities in mind, but also literally can the game be accessed by people, and can people get through enough of it to get to its core? Does it have enough universal appeal in its tutorial and initial levels to capture hearts and minds? This affects the ranking, if not the mere presence on the list.
This is a really provocative idea.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth separating into the accessibility on a physical, emotional, mental accessibility level.
Okay.
Is I think really neither here nor there, just because of how our industry has really not been fast to adopt those sorts of things.
Definitely.
So I don't think that at this point in time that's really frankly a really applicable criteria.
Yeah.
Even though I do think that games like The Last of Us Part 2 and actually Part 1 and Ratchet and Clank and a lot of Sony stuff do get bonus points for that.
Yes, definitely.
And that's an important thing to bear in mind. It doesn't really factor a ton into this list for me.
Yeah.
Accessibility in a design sense and accessibility in a literal accessibility perspective. What do you want to talk about first?
Well, I think the one that we glommed onto, because I think we very quickly, like you were saying, said that accessibility in terms of catering to disabilities can be bonus points, but as a criteria, I don't think it's necessarily fair to the breadth of the medium, because a game like Wii Sports can't really be played if you don't have a range of motion, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't influential. It doesn't hit these other things. Of course, you can personally factor in accessibility, especially because I would say, and through what he said here, accessibility to you is the only way a game is going to end up on this list. If you have a disability, if you struggle with certain kinds of games, that means the game's not going to show up on your list because you probably didn't play it or didn't enjoy it because it doesn't speak to your taste or your physical capabilities. And so I think by default, a game being accessible is sort of in all of our minds, but it's only through your own experience that you can draw this into any kind of conversation. I don't think it's necessarily fair to set a bar because everyone has a different bar of what accessibility means to them, whether that is physical or through the disability options in a game, or through, like he said, can you play enough of it? Does it capture your hearts and mind because it was open enough to you and to pick it up easily? That's not necessary for good game design, but it can be necessary to your experience with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think that this is a great criteria.
Yes, which is why it's not on our list.
Right, and I think it's just
only great idea. Only great criteria make it onto our list.
I think it's worth just going through briefly.
Sure.
Not to belabor the point, but I don't think judging a game based on how accessible its mechanical design is necessarily a good way at showing how wide our medium is able to traverse in terms of intents.
There are a lot of inaccessible games that are still equally interestingly designed.
Yeah, everything from games that are physically demanding, like a Sekiro, to sort of an intellectually demanding thing like Disco Elysium.
Sure.
I think this criteria would preclude both of those, but there's no doubt that they are both uniquely important creative expressions.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's necessarily fair to the artistic texture of the medium to discount those games.
Yeah.
I also don't think that being able to appeal to a mainstream audience is inherently good or a sign of being essential either.
Sure, I agree.
Because as I was saying to Tucker before, a game like Horizon Forbidden West, you can drop the game down so there's basically no combat challenge. Aloy will give you the solutions to puzzles, various things.
And lots of disability options there. It's a first party game. They do really well at that.
But if you put that controller in front of somebody that has a limited understanding of video games, they will not be able to progress. Yeah. You put Super Mario Odyssey with the assist mode in front of somebody who's unfamiliar with video games or can hang with Mario Kart and 2D Mario, they won't get very far in Odyssey. I've seen that firsthand. And so I just think it's important to note that there is a component of myopia within our understanding of video games that even games that we would consider to be friendly are not friendly by simple merits of things like camera control is very hard for people that don't understand games. Yeah. And then at the same time, for people like us that we're speaking to, because we're largely speaking to each other in these conversations, it's not useful to tell me because I can't get into Sekiro because it's too hard for me. The Sekiro is not a beautiful expression of what games can do. Yeah. So that's why I'd push back on that point.
Yeah. There was also another way to interpret this, which is the reason that almost made it on our list. We had to cut it, which is accessibility in terms of literally is it easy to get your hands on to try the game in the modern sense. And I think that this is a very important thing on a subjective level. Yeah. Because I'm not going to be able to put many games on here that aren't accessible to me today. I like collecting games, but I also like collecting games that I have the console for and aren't available on the digital storefronts in other ways or haven't been re-released. Lots of games have that available to them. And frankly, I think most of the games that would make it onto a list like this are going to be accessible in some form or fashion, whether that's NSO or Game Pass or PlayStation Plus or has been remade or Konami or Capcom are putting these fucking collections that have every goddamn game in them. Most of the games are going to meet that bar. However, there are still lots of games that don't meet those metrics, and especially because the metric is so nebulous. Do you mean only current gen hardware? Does last gen hardware that is still technically accessible through buying things in stores count? Like, there are probably still Wii U games being sold at fucking Walmart. You can go buy a 3DS pretty easily. So do 3DSs count? Do DS games count? Okay, then if you're going to have a DS, because lots of people have DSs, does Game Boy Advance count? Does emulation count? There's so many different questions that nixing that entirely and focusing on the merits of the game itself rather than can I get my hands on it allows there to be just enough wiggle room to, if someone played a game that is not accessible and has a lot of personal merit to it and was influential to the medium in different ways and push the medium forward, that can still be included on this list, even if you can't necessarily go play it today.
Yeah, it's a hard criteria, and it's one that I thought a lot about, because you're right. If we're thinking of essential games as a jumping off point for people to go explore more of the medium from, you want them to be able to get those touchstones.
Yeah.
But I think you also need to account for the fact that a lot of games that are essential for a lot of other reasons on this list are maybe just don't meet that criteria.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily think that alone should preclude them from a high position on the list.
Yeah, definitely.
And especially because, and I'll just leave it as this, there are many ways to get most games.
Yes.
There are many ways
yes.
to get most games. And I just think that bearing that in mind, we cannot include this as a criteria against it. There are a lot of, I'll put it this way, there are going to be a lot of GameCube games on my list.
Yeah.
And a lot of those are not easy to get now.
True. Definitely.
However,
you're going to spend fucking $70 on them.
Right. And that's the interesting thing, because then that introduces in the conversation is the barrier then
money.
Yeah. And maybe so, but you can also make the argument that there's a lot of current gen games that are very expensive physically.
Yeah.
There's some there are games, like, I'm not sure people are necessarily clamoring to include Platinum Games Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a current, you can play that on your PS5 if you have a PS4 disc, but the game's delisted from the PS4 storefront.
I didn't even know that game existed.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say like the Cowabunga collection.
No.
Like, what the fuck?
but the point being that there's just, it becomes messy as to what's the issue here. Is the issue price? You can circumvent that barrier.
Yeah.
Is the issue not having the games available on current hardware? You can circumvent that barrier.
Yeah.
I do, though, think that there are reasons on this, because I think that this is almost like a soft criteria.
Okay.
It's something you can consider. Because as you were saying, Overwatch is a hard one to include, because Overwatch 1 is impossible to play now.
Yeah.
You can even make an argument, I think, maybe for like some 3DS eShop games.
Yeah. Being
now either largely so inaccessible or so hard to emulate that, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Or so it's I think this is something that you can leave to your discretion.
Yeah. What I think is interesting about that is it again is as a soft criteria.
Yeah.
You can say, okay, it doesn't meet that, but it meets everything else, so I kind of want to include it. But I also think that it is a soft criteria by default, because the accessibility of these games, the ones that are easier to get your hands on, are going to be the one that more people played. And so therefore, by the thing we've started this whole conversation with, the pattern is going to show that the games that more people can get their hands on are going to show up more often, and then are going to deserve higher spots, and more people are going to have more passion for them, and more likely you're going to have a lot more influence on other games because more people played them, and therefore designers have experience with them, and so they're going to incorporate some of their elements. It is a soft criteria by default, but not including it as a hard criteria, I think, allows for more expression.
I agree.
Petra agrees as well.
She agrees.
Why did you just come in here and yell? And she's gone.
And she's running away. But Tucker, I think we've been through everything.
The ringer.
I want to now be very deliberate. Hold on.
Jesus Christ, man.
I'm just gonna get her. You want to come sit with us, Kitty? Come sit with us.
And she's up the stairs.
She's off the stairs. Okay.
She wanted attention. She got approximately 1.5 seconds of attention. That was enough.
That's enough. She's like Matan Evans at the Game Awards. She just wants to come cause a disturbance, to be remembered, and leave.
Yeah.
I don't like Matan Evans. I just felt like I had to share that. I don't like Matan Evans. Let's talk about explicitly how people can submit and what we want them to submit.
Yeah.
You should submit a top 50 list.
Yeah.
Now, this is important, and we waffle on this a lot. We felt that submitting only 10 games is way too few to introduce nuance.
Yep.
But we also felt like asking you guys to submit 100 games is unrealistic because, and this is the very, very, very important part.
Yeah.
You must rank every game.
Yeah.
Every game has to be ranked. And the reason being is it's the only way to accurately and fairly score these titles.
Sure.
Because we need to be able to say the game at number 1 gets 50 points, and the game at number 50 gets 1 point.
Yeah.
And every game on the way up gets points between those numbers.
I don't even know. Fuck, I don't even know how I'm gonna actually do this. Like actually at all. So
I've actually thought. We'll talk about this later. I've thought about this. I've actually learned some things. I'm gonna tell you. It's actually gonna be very simple. But so that's very important. 50 is enough that between, even if we only get 5 or 6 submissions, I'm hoping we get more than. I'm hoping a lot of you guys participate. that's going to give so many games we will easily build out to 100.
Yes, definitely.
And it's also important to know that sometimes in an experiment like this, there are concessions, there are things you couldn't necessarily do.
Yeah.
So us doing 50 is a middle ground.
Yes.
To get more of you guys able to submit.
Yeah. Because that, I think, is the most important thing to me. We're talking about largely looking for patterns. Because everyone's bringing their subjective opinion and their experience to this. But once those patterns start to emerge and a game like Breath of the Wild, as you mentioned earlier, shows up on a lot of our lists, frankly, I think it's probably going to show up on everyone who submits, that game meets those criteria for enough people to where it should be at the top of the list. It reflects enough people, the most people. And we want as many people to submit as we can. And we know that ranking them is going to be the hardest part of this. Choosing 50 games is probably not going to be that difficult. Of course, you're going to need to spend as much time as you want to / can on debating each of these criteria, what meets these criteria, what's obvious to me, what requires a little bit more inward
thought research, going back and trying some games, whatever you feel like you want to do.
Which is why, though, this is going to be a process that we're allowing after the time of posting a month.
You're going to have plenty of time.
Yeah. Enough time to where maybe we're going to wait until we feel like we have enough submissions, but this is going to be something that's not coming in a week. This is not coming a couple days later. Of course, our video is going to be coming between us. We'll talk about it in a second.
Yeah.
But you're going to have enough time to where ranking 50 games, as tough as it is, you're not going to have to stress. You're not going to have to rush. Because we also don't want this to be something like, Mario 64, shit. We want this to be thought-provoking.
Yeah, think about it. Take your time.
And we want this to make you think a little bit about your own taste and why certain games have stuck with you or not, or have criteria and don't meet other criteria, and how you weigh that. And if you want to, bring it into the Discord. Well, I'll make a channel about this. We can talk about, does it meet this? Is it enough that it meets this other ones to where it's okay it doesn't meet another one? I think that conversation is going to be incredibly interesting to have, and on a specific game-by-game level, we want that to be something that we are having between the two of us in video number 2 of this trilogy.
Yeah, because that's the other thing. This isn't like a secret ballot process.
No.
And so we're not.
Well, we're going to secret from each other so we don't influence each other.
Just because we want to have more fun that way.
Yes.
But if you want to watch our video and you think, oh man, I played that game, I didn't think about that, I want to include it.
Yeah,
that's totally fine.
Yeah,
like there's no expectation that you're gonna do this and totally silo it off, other than us because we're stupid and we think it'll be more fun for us personally to not know and then compare our lists. But work together, collaborate. Well, the channel's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'm talking about backlog banter.
Yes. Oh, that was a great idea.
Yeah, it was a great idea. But yeah, so collaborate, figure that out, and again, game number 1 gets 50 points. Game number 50 gets 1 point.
Yeah.
And you can figure it from there.
Yeah.
Game 2 is 49 points,
yeah.
etc. Yeah, and the method of submission I think is important.
Okay.
I think it's fine to submit however you want.
Okay.
But it needs to be in a place that we can access it.
Yeah.
And it's going to be very useful, I think, if you can have it in a text-based format.
Okay, yeah. So it can be copy and pasted.
So it can be copy and pasted. That's the important thing.
You can make a backlogged version, but also if you would please, number 1 blank, number 2 blank.
Yeah, and if you want to submit that as a DM to one of us, if you want to
make a Google Doc,
you want to put it, you do whatever you want, as long as it is a text-based format.
You can also put it in the channel, and I can pin it so it's easy to access.
Yeah, do that too, and then other people can look at your list and think about it and get ideas.
Yeah,
but yeah, do that. We will then, I think, probably make a backlogged list so people can look at it because it'll be cool and aesthetic and fun.
Yeah, and I believe I also have a backlog account.
I'm
Jesus, I haven't used that in forever.
I'm sure you have.
Fucking hell.
But we'll make a nice, pretty version of the list.
Yeah.
The other thing I've been thinking about, do this if you want. If there's certain games that you're like, oh, this is kind of a cool pick, leave a little sentence next to it. Why?
Yeah, definitely.
I just think that'd be cool.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about it. Or if you made a really interesting choice at like number 10, but it doesn't have I think a game at number 10 is probably gonna make the list anyway. Let's say make a really interesting pick towards one of your lists and it missed the list entirely. I still want to know why you did it so we can read it out and just be interesting to discuss.
Definitely. You can do it for everyone. We won't be able to get to everyone, but key examples.
Yeah, so it'd be a lot of work for you and it just would not be feasible for us.
Yeah.
But if you thinking something cool, throw it in the document, and we'll have a look. We'll talk about it. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Definitely.
But like we said, you're gonna have like a month. We will have updates in Discord with harder deadlines.
Yeah.
And we will aggregate all of your lists on our end. So just focus on your 50 games. They are all ranked. Remember the scoring system. Keep on the criteria. We're going to have all of this stuff in the Google document in the description just so it's easy for you to participate. I think that's everything.
That's it.
Yeah.
We fucking, again, went through the ringer here.
Yeah.
But it was important because, again, the lack of this ringer, or at least the public access to this ringer, is what our problem was with these other lists. Yeah. Like, why did you include these things? What was the process of asking people? How did they make decisions of what went onto their list that were then compiled? What's the goal of this list? And I think us being transparent and having this conversation allows there to be a sense of honesty to this. It's like, like, we're not fucking with you. Like, we're sharing our opinions, and we're putting them on a list, and we're working together with other people, and you know why we put these things on here, and we're going to discuss those things on our video of us together, and then we'll also be having this conversation in our Discord. And so hopefully we're moving this conversation forward a little bit, because lists like these have been around for almost as long as video games have. But we hope that by being a little more transparent about it and inviting conversation of criteria and inviting bias, that it'll feel more genuine and bring something to this conversation of what essential games can be.
Yeah. Get to work,
bitch.